Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'm your host, Joe Kuzma, and I am very gracious once again to have my guest / co-host here with me today, Ron Lippock of the Pittsburgh Sports Daily Bulletin. Ron, how's it going today?
It's going great for a morning with too little coffee.
I know how that is. I have my coffee right here, and I was just talking. I hope when I reach around my microphone, I don't bump it and you hear this boom, 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 boom. You know, I hear these things sometimes. It's funny because we all want to achieve perfection in recording these shows, and when you listen, and I'm going to point this out because now people are going to notice it not only on this show, but they're going to notice it when they listen to like Sirius XM NFL Radio, or I always listen to 93.7 The Fan out of Pittsburgh, and you can hear those guys like it sounds like they just like take a step away real quick, move their chair back. You could hear them. You could hear like a lot of different things, coughing and random noises. Somebody randomly walking into the room. So we try.
Real life happens.
Yes, it does. So if you hear any small children, wives, anything else happening, you'll understand what we're dealing with here, myself and Ron. But we're going to promo. Actually, we got two things I want to throw out there as a promo first. Ron is the author of Steelers Takeaways. It is a fantastic book that I just tweeted just the other day about, and I was talking. Ron has written this book with help of, I think, over 400 interviews from former Pittsburgh Steelers players. And
that's correct. Yeah, thank you.
It's just very well organized. It's not one of these things where you flip a chapter and it's like, well, this is what Elsie Greenwood has to say. It's actually organized by era, and there's specific topics. Like before Chuck Noll arrived, talking to many of the players, it gets their perspective and their voice on some of the coaches and the things that they had. They like, what was it? No weight room, or it was a really lousy weight room, and things of that nature.
No weight rooms, one shower, the whole bit. I appreciate the plug. Yeah, there's about 400 interviews, 400 former players from the 50s through today. So
Yeah, so if you go over, you can follow Ron at Pittsburgh Sport is his handle on Twitter. He's always posting the link. It retweeted it from Steel City Underground. There'll be a link somewhere probably with this podcast, or you can find it on the website, or any of Ron's articles. It's in his byline. It's available for paperback and also electronically if you're a Kindle person like I am. But I do have the paperback one. There's something about holding like an actual physical book sometimes. It's really cool. Plus, I got it for a gift. It was one of the things that was on like my Amazon wish list. So my wife can't necessarily wrap an electronic, like an ebook. So that's one of the things there. Yeah. So just another thing that's going on here in the world of Steel City Underground, we have a contest that's ongoing for the month of March. And I failed to mention this with my last guest, Brian Roach. He's actually, in conjunction, put up one of his own signed helmets from Rocky Bleier, who speaks in Ron's book, right?
He does, actually. That's very nice of Brian.
Yeah, so he has this signed helmet from Rocky Bleier, and it's in conjunction with the March of Dimes because Brian has a very touching story with his own daughter where March of Dimes research their research went towards some of the procedures that helped his daughter, and his daughter, obviously a very healthy, just fun high school aged girl right now, full of life. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like she has like any issues or problems now, but when she was born, she did. And that's what the March of Dimes is all about. So if you head on over to steelcityunderground.com/ March of Dimes, it's March-of-Dimes, and we have like the pop-up and everything going, so you can't miss it. It's like right in your face. But if you donate and follow the instructions, I have the official rules there, so I'm going to skirt tail those just a little bit. But this is basically, if you donate on behalf of March of Dimes and leave a note that you're doing it as part of this contest, we'll enter you for a chance to win this helmet signed by Rocky Bleier. So if you hadn't had a chance to do so yet, please go head over to the website and do this. It's for a great cause, and you also have a chance to win a really cool piece of Steelers merchandise. So, Ron, today, getting down to business, I almost feel like we got some of the advertising and sponsor stuff out of the way, but we don't have any advertisers or sponsors to speak of, at least not yet. So, hey, there's a plug too. Go ahead and contact us, either one of us, if you're interested. But we're gonna switch gears. We've been talking free agency. Brian and myself talked about the moves or lack of moves, which are still making a decision whether you make a move in free agency or not. We've already beaten that to death. So today, I think it's time to finally change direction and head towards the NFL draft. And we're going to just kind of go through the positional groups and see where the Steelers might have some needs. And Ron, you say the Steelers actually have 5 real needs. I guess we could kind of gloss over what those are at first, and then we'll go into more detail.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I'm still holding to that. I mean, at corner, I think they actually need 2 corners. I think you need a starting corner to replace Cockrell at some point who can press. You need a slot cornerback or safety / corner who can resolve some of those slot issues that they've incurred with Gay's sort of step down in terms of performance and Golson's unreliability due to injury. You have issues at backup running back, not huge issues to fill, but they need to be resolved. And, of course, an edge linebacker, outside linebacker, that's a big deal. And I did say wide receiver early on, but they brought in Justin Hunter, so that helps alleviate that a bit. And so you can sort of slide inside linebacker in there a little bit just for depth. I don't think they need a starter. I think they're very happy with Vince Williams in terms of what he can add. So those are really the spots that I think really need addressed, and maybe some depth at defensive line too, but nothing, again, urgent there. I think they like some of the guys they have in camp already.
Yeah, and you know what, I don't want to say don't disagree because that's just not right. That's something the Yinzers would say, but some Pittsburghese, my mom, how are Yins doing? Like all of that. So, yeah. These are real needs. Now, I know some fans are really beat up over the free agency thing, and the thing we've been trying to hammer this home, myself, yourself, Brian, when we had other guests on, such as Rob Rossi or Jacob Klinger. We've been talking about this. The Steelers kind of supplement what they're planning to do, their areas of weakness, by bringing in some free agents, such as Justin Hunter so far. And that's just to kind of help alleviate if they don't have to reach for a wide receiver in the draft, for example. They don't have to spend a high pick. They don't have to spend any pick, really. And particularly, I know they're waiting on the news of whether or not Martavis Bryant gets reinstated, which should be like any minute, any day now when we find that information out. And I think that will solidify whether or not they decide to go wide receiver. That's pretty much, I know, where you were going with this. That's the unknown. Sammy Coates' hands are the unknown. Actually, Justin Hunter's even an unknown for that matter. Yeah,
he's only a 1-year contract. It's not like they brought him in as a full-blown answer to anything. I think he's just a safety valve if something should go awry with Bryant and Coates.
And so wide receiver, okay, maybe not 5, but I think everybody's looking at that defense. And you had mentioned defensive line, which wasn't one of the main priorities, much in the same way that you mentioned in your article, which is kind of on the same topic. That tight end isn't really a big need. And a lot of people, I think, just tend to forget that the Steelers did make a big splash in free agency last year to pick up Ladarius Green. And from all indications, it looks like Kevin Colbert, the general manager, Ladarius Green himself, they all feel that he's going to play this year. So if that happens, you have a guy who played the most snaps besides AB, Big Ben, and any offensive lineman, and that's Jesse James, who has a ton of experience. Maybe not the same level or caliber or player as Green could be, but what I'm trying to say is that you get guys that are hurt that are coming back, and with the defensive line, you also have Cam Hayward, basically like the team captain on the defense, coming back there as well. Right. So I think everyone's kind of forgotten that there's a few missing pieces that will be back, but there are unreliable ones, like you said, with like Golson. And, of course, lost Lawrence Timmons as well. So you have to see what you're going to do with the linebackers. But everyone thinks they're going to go edge with their first pick. Why is that, Ron? I have my own feelings on it, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, I mean, for me, edge is the one position that won't slide to round 2 that's a must. They have 2 really, for me, must positions. Cornerback at some point and edge. They need someone behind James Harrison. Jarvis Jones, who wasn't wonderful anyway, has left for free agency. And they need a dominant pass rusher on that other side. This draft happens to align perfectly with needs. They need an outside linebacker. There will definitely be one. It will be a Watt, a McKinley, Lawson, or the guy from Youngstown State, Rivers. One of those guys will be there. And I have to believe probably 2 or 3 of those guys might actually be there because it's such a deep draft. They will not be there round 2. That's my thought.
Exactly. That's where I'm at too. I don't think like these other positions, and we see a lot of starting corners in the NFL that aren't taken in the first round. We also saw some first round busts like Justin Gilbert, for example. But I mean, Richard Sherman, I think Sherman was a 5th round pick. Chris Harris, he wasn't even drafted. So it's not likely.
There's not much separating the corners that are supposed to be there at the Steelers round 2 pick versus the corners, or the round 1 pick versus the Steelers pick in round 2, or even some say even round 3. Once you get past the first 1 or 2 outside linebackers, the rest all cluster together in terms of that top second tier of outside linebackers. You're going to be happy with almost any one of those guys at the Steelers pick at 30. Corner, it's the same thing that actually slides to round 2, where there's a cluster there that is equally there are a lot of guys that are almost interchangeable in terms of how good they are. They might not have different skill sets, but they're all very good at round 2. It's a deeper draft at corner. There's a bigger cluster of those really good guys that will be there at round 2. You cannot say the same thing about outside linebacker, and that's why I think you got to go edge round 1, corner round 2. I know no one likes to say, oh, this is how it's going to end up and predict drafting players by need, but again, this draft happens to align perfectly with need, and so there you go. I think that's how they'll go.
Edge is kind of like one of those positions, just like the quarterback position. If you want to get a premier player, you have to do it fast and early in the draft. The higher you could go, more than likely the better pass rusher you're going to get. There is a premium on them. In fact, if you let one of them hit free agency, just watch and see the type of money that they fetch. And I mean, corners do too, but this is an extremely deep draft at several positions. I think that's the other reason why you were kind of alluding to wide receiver, but this is definitely a need type thing. And the edge guys they could all go and go fast. And there are several teams that may still be interested in getting an edge guy themselves that draft ahead of the Steelers, including pick 29 right before the Steelers pick at 30 in the first round. That would be the Green Bay Packers may have a need there as well. So there's this thing that's going to go on this year, just like last year, where everybody pretty much pigeonholed the Steelers into taking a corner, which they did. And guess what happened with the pick right before the Steelers picked? They took the guy that everyone thought everyone was mocking to Pittsburgh. He goes to Cincinnati, William Jackson III, a corner. So I think that's going to happen again this year. You're going to get very excited. You're going to see one of these gentlemen start to slip lower into that first round. But the problem is the Steelers don't pick again until I think 62. And just for some perspective, the Cleveland Browns have 5 picks in the first 2 rounds. In the first 65, they have the first overall. I think they have number 12, and then it goes. I think they pick first. They essentially the 33rd pick or whatever it is after the first round. They have another one in the middle there, and then 65. So
and you have to figure they're going to take Garrett round 1. That first pick. They'd be fools not to. Which it's Cleveland, so we hold our breath for them. But that will start the outside linebacker role, from first pick. But again, it's so deep. This is a very uniquely deep pass rushing class. And even a guy like Watt or Rivers, who some people feel aren't first rounders, I think they're maybe some consider sort of high second round guys. But the Pittsburgh Steelers picking at 30, I think they'll be okay taking a guy like that at 30. They wooed Watt at dinner last week at the Wisconsin Pro Day. Clearly they have interest in, and they loved Lawson. McKinley is a guy that I think, because of a shoulder injury, will slip. He's probably a mid-first round guy in terms of talent, but with a shoulder injury, he'll be out 4 to 6 months, they say. If that's the case, he could be another Heath Miller type of pickup, where he was projected much higher, but people shied away due to injury. And Rivers is is the big question in all of this. He's a guy from Youngstown State, seems to hold up well against high-level talent, but can't really be sure fully. And he's a guy that, if you look at on tape, has some of the skills. I'm not as convinced on him looking at the tape on his effort level at times, but he's a guy that you could see them reaching for at 30 as well a little bit.
I don't necessarily want to say it's a reach, and I'm going to come around to Rivers here in a second, but at pick 30, you're at the bottom of the first round. Why do you think the New England Patriots are always trading out of that pick? I mean, they're when you're winning, you're drafting so late in the first round, it's almost like it's a second-round pick, except there are teams that may become trade partners because let's say somebody kind of slips there. And this was a scenario I had heard with, I think, Pat Kerwin and Jim Miller on Sirius XM NFL Radio. They were talking about if the Cleveland Browns do not take a quarterback with those first two picks, let's say they take like a corner or a wide receiver or somebody like Mike Williams falls at 12, which would be, I think, pretty crazy in itself too. They could see somebody like Cleveland who has 11 picks in this draft. Would they trade back up in the first round just so they can have that option to lock up a first-round drafted player for a fifth-year option down the road, especially with the quarterback position being an expensive one, the way everything has gone with salaries in the league? You never know. I mean, I'm not saying the Steelers are going to trade out of that, but maybe somebody will. Somebody might it might be the panic button of maybe one of these teams are going to try and take a quarterback between picks 20 to 32 or whatever. I don't know, but
well, and look, if there are those four guys that I mentioned, they're at 30 when the Steelers pick. I could see them trading down out of the first round entirely into the second and getting an extra pick. And if that pick they acquire is a high second-round pick, they know they can still get one of those guys.
Oh,
so that's not out of the question.
Absolutely. It's kind of where my thought process is, and I know everyone thinks, and we saw the Broncos do it with Paxton Lynch last year, but the phone's not always ringing for these guys to trade back and play Draft Day, the movie out there. It just doesn't work that way. So, more than likely they're going to be picking at 30. Getting back to Rivers, and I don't know if you knew this, Ron, I am a Youngstown State alumnus.
Well, then there you go. Yeah, so the pick's Rivers.
Well, I've been around this team since I was basically a baby. This is the program that initially was coached by Jim Tressel, and they won 4 national championships. Appeared in 6 of them in a decade, starting from '91 through '99 or 2000. They took a dip. They had a few different coaches come and go. They ended up acquiring, by means of his firing from Nebraska, former Nebraska head coach Bo Pelini, who is very defensive-minded, hard-nosed, almost like reminds you of like a Bill Cowher type guy, very short, really short-tempered. And so Rivers was there, and the guy that was previously there was Eric Wofford, who was like an offensive line coach with the 49ers the last year or two, and he was known for being a good recruiter. And there's another guy that was worked out. They had a pro day at Youngstown State. I had joked that I was going to sneak in there earlier in last week. Kevin Green, who is now going to be the linebackers coach for the New York Jets, talking about other teams with needs, and Joey Porter, the current linebackers coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, were both there, and they put not only Derek Rivers through his paces, but the other guy who bookends Derek Rivers, who could probably go undrafted, but he was formerly from Nebraska. I guess he had some problem there, and he ends up at Youngstown State by virtue of having been recruited to Nebraska by Bo Pelini. His name is Avery Moss, and he is also a very good edge rusher as well, but one of these guys you might take a flyer on and bring to camp. So, yeah.
But do you think there's anything to be read into the fact that at Lawson and Watts pro days, Colbert and Tomlin, I believe Colbert was there, but Tomlin was there, and at Rivers and I can't speak for McKinley, he was not.
I
wonder if there's something to be. I wonder if there's anything to be read into that. And we're talking a lot about edge, but there's, I hope it doesn't happen, because I think edge is, I think it's going to fall like we described it will, and then they will not have a shot at a good edge guy in round 2. But they could go corner in round 1. And the one guy that I'm really curious about, if they do go round 1 at that direction, is the guy from Connecticut, the safety / corner hybrid. Obi Emenwafu, I'm butchering the name, from Connecticut, who is a guy that can solve some of the slot problems. He's a guy that reminds me a lot of Carnell Lake. and what he can do, and he's got the speed, the size, the strength, the willingness to hit in the run, but great cover skills as well. He's a guy that could really solve that hybrid role that they need, much like a Patrick Chung does in New England. And there aren't too many of guys like that in this draft that are big enough to be able to do that, to be stout against the run if people run against the nickel but can still cover those slot guys. He's one of those guys. He could be an interesting pick if he's there. He probably won't be. His numbers are off the boards from the combine, but if he does happen to be there, that's a guy to watch out for too. He's sort of the mystery guy in all of this to me.
Yeah, Eric had actually discussed this. Eric Herman, who's the managing editor here at Steel City Underground, he had mentioned this earlier last week about it's a term that had been just coined by Dion Buchanan with the Arizona Cardinals. They call money backer, and it's almost like this. It's almost like this infatuation that Steelers fans have had with let's move Ryan Shazier to safety. Well, we're kind of getting we're getting into these fast hybrid players, and this is one that has been intriguing. I've also heard many people speculate that Jabril Peppers would be similar too, but I don't like Peppers as much, and I'm not here to analyze the players, break them down right now as much as just looking at the needs. But this is something if everyone wants to take a look at. Money backer is an interesting concept. It would help with the problems. People are wondering why they let Lawrence Timmons go. Lawrence Timmons was a guy that you had to bring off the field in certain sub packages, and if he stayed out there at times, he could be a liability. Well, I don't think Vince Williams is any less of a liability. So you're looking for an athletic player that can be put into these type of situations and maybe not have like any type of drop in talent or coverage or performance while out on the field. It's a very intriguing concept. Just to spin back around to the pro day dinner and the whining and dining of players, I do believe that the Steelers 2 years ago, the very last visit that they had, I think they get 30 of them officially. Now, they go to pro days and things like that, but an official visit and they sat down and had dinner with Bud Dupree was one of the last guys, because I think what happened there was they just felt that Dupree was not going to follow them. I think it was in the same area, like in the early 20s or something like that with their pick 21 maybe. So I wouldn't read too much into that because it took them forever to come around to Dupree, and now we see how that's turned out.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I know we don't have a lot of time left here, but I do think that if they go corner, I think the issue with their cornerback needs is they need two different people. And the slot cornerback issue is going to have to be addressed. I'm hoping that they can address a little bit of that in free agency. A guy like Roby, I forget his
Nickel Roby Coleman,
Nickel Roby Coleman. He's an interesting guy. A guy like that. But the problem that they have is every time they go nickel, people run up the gut because the nickel back is too small.
Exactly.
Roby Coleman is small. That's why you look at a guy like this guy from Connecticut in the draft who is tough. He's one of those rare guys who like that Cornell Lake kind of guy who can do both. I don't know if they'll find that guy in free agency this stage, that's for sure. But they do need two corners. I think they need the nickel or the slot corner more than they need the outside corner right now, because I think you have a guy in Cockrell who can do the job decently enough. He doesn't press, but Burns can, and I think he can help with that enough to win now. But you can't win with this slot position. That's how they got abused against New England. And if they're going to go through New England or any other team, they're going to do it by people going to nickel and dime this team to death if they can't resolve that issue. So that's the biggest issue outside of edge they have. Press corner is something that would be great to be able to resolve, but I don't know if it's as pressing of a need, no pun intended, as the slot.
Yeah, and just to explain, we're talking about like a corner, your boundary corners, your outside corners versus like a slot or nickel corner. When we talk about the nickel, we're talking about you add an additional defensive back onto the field, a corner or like a safety. So with when you're in a 3-4, you have 3 down linemen, you have 4 linebackers, you have your 2 inside, your 2 outside, and then you have 2 corners and 2 safeties, a free safety and strong safety. So typically you're taking a linebacker or a defensive lineman off the field, replacing them with this nickel, meaning the fifth fifth corner, and then when you add like an additional defensive back, they call it dime for some reason, because I guess, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me.
And this is when teams go more wide receivers, pass heavy on long down situations. Exactly.
Yeah, so they're two different styles of players. So when we're talking about William Gay, we feel that maybe he was in a decline. He didn't have a good year last year, so he could be in decline. He is aging. Senquez Golson has had an injury history. He's supposed to maybe fill that role. But what happened was when Artie Burns wasn't ready to play last year, they had to play Gay on the outside and slide Sean Davis over into that nickel role. So if they keep playing shell game with all of these players' positions and juggling the roster and the depth chart as they are, this is why Ron and myself are saying they actually need two guys, because they need the traditional guy that lines up on the wide receiver, and then maybe the additional guy that can be on a wide receiver, can pick up a running back, the bigger tight ends, et cetera, et cetera.
And the reason why the slot corner is so much different and so much more difficult is when you look at a boundary corner, wide receivers really can only go really two directions. They can go north-south, or they can go, depending on what side of the field they are, on either left or right. So the field is almost halved. So when you're a boundary corner, it's a little bit less difficult to keep up with the directional mission of the receiver. When you're in the slot, the receiver can go anywhere. They can go left, right, north, south. They have the whole field really at their disposal. It's a much harder position to cover. You have to be much quicker, much more light on your feet, much more. You have to have that quickness about you. And generally, though not always, those guys are smaller guys to have that kind of quickness. And the problem is when you're a smaller guy, then they know that you're out there. And as an offense, you run up the gut at that smaller guy because they're less effective against the run.
Yeah,
you get a guy that is of size, then you have some ability to counter that issue too.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on with a few of those games where the Steelers struggled against the Patriots the second half of the regular season with LeGarrette Blount, Ezekiel Elliott, another example there. That's, darned if you do, darned if you don't. And this is an ever more important position to have on your roster because, let's face it, the NFL has been a pass-happy league. But that said, there is one other position we did want to cover because we don't know who's going to be the guy that's behind Le'Veon Bell. Now, Le'Veon Bell doesn't come off the field often, but what if he gets hurt? What if he gets suspended? You got to have a backup plan, and we think we're going to need a running back as well.
Yeah, we do, and we'll cover that for a couple minutes before we jump off. But a guy like Connor, a guy like Perrine, they generally like big backs behind Le'Veon Bell because they like to mix it up. If you remember sort of who they've had in the past, they've had D'Angelo Williams, Legarius Blunt. They've had big guys behind him. And so when you think about the draft or you think about free agency, there are guys like Hightower still out there who's a pretty tough running guy who wouldn't be a terrible acquisition for running back if he's healthy. But if you go the draft route, there's a lot of really good physical backs, sort of this more one-dimensional type of big back, Legarius Blunt kind of backs. In this draft, one of the guys I really like happens to be right at home here in James Conner, but they also have Perrine and a few other guys. They will have no problem finding a good, solid running back rounds 3 or 4. So that doesn't really worry me. They're out there. They're easy to get in terms of where they'll fall in terms of the Steelers draft positioning. So yeah, they'll find that guy.
James Conner always comes to mind, especially since he went to the University of Pittsburgh. But I haven't seen much activity, even with the combine, in that the Steelers have really approached or talked with him. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, but he's on that field every day with them. Mm-hmm. They know him. You even see the tweets and all that. They don't need to talk to him anymore. They play on the same field. They talk to each other every day. And he's one of those guys that you know what you're going to get. He's not gonna have the best combine measurables. This is a guy that's an on the field guy. You're not gonna get a full analysis of him by the combine by any means. He's not gonna run the fastest 40s. He's not gonna bench maybe the most. But this is the guy that when he's on the field, I think is going to give you a surprising amount of value and contribution. He's
Antonio Brown at the running back position. That's what it reminds me of. And
he's just one of those guys who's the sum measures much greater than all the parts.
And Ben Roethlisberger, of course, was playing ping pong. This was on like Instagram or something like that with James Conner and some record.
Well, they need a tie-breaking game, right?
Yeah.
I think they're tied. So maybe they need to bring him in just to solve the tie.
Yeah, I just thought that the official, like, I think there was 60 interviews at the combine that they were allotted. Every NFL team had the opportunity, up to 60, I should say, players that they could interview. And by far and most, edge rushers, the edge guys, outside linebackers, and defensive ends who could convert. I mean, and basically the difference there, so people, we're talking 3-4 versus 4-3. 4-3 for defensive linemen, your bookends on those, they'll play with their hand in the dirt versus standing up on the outside edge like a James Harrison would in a 3-4. So you'll see Lamar Woodley, for example. He was a defensive end in college that converted over to an outside linebacker. Believe it or not, that's who I compare Derek Rivers to, just from my naked eye perspective of watching him in college, especially through the postseason where Youngstown State played 5 postseason games because they're in that FCS, the old 1AA. So, I mean, they just got worn down. So if you're seeing it by the time you get to that national championship game, and he still had a stellar national championship game, that's who he was really reminding me of. But that's the difference there is, so that's why we call them edge guys and not necessarily outside linebackers, because some of these guys are versatile enough to play either way, hand in the dirt or standing up.
Exactly. So let's hope we get the right one at 30 and then get a good corner. And, this team gets 4 guys back, if not 5 in Golson, that they didn't have against New England last year in Hayward. Bryant, hopefully he'll be reinstated. I can't imagine he won't be. They'll get Bell back. They'll get Green back. And maybe Golson. That's 5 hugely impactful guys before the draft even starts. And they'll get your edge guy. They'll get a corner there. That's 7 guys on a team that was 1 game away from a Super Bowl that will have potentially great impact. That's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. That's what I was trying to say when I was talking. I may have not hammered the point home, but when I was with Brian on the last episode, Elliot Harrison put out his power rankings for the NFL and had the Steelers 3rd, and everybody's just like, well, wait a minute, they haven't done anything. Well, they don't have to. They have reinforcements are coming. I mean,
right.
So.
It's the teams that you see in preseason that go 4-0, or often the teams that are the worst teams in the regular season. They go 4-0 because they have to play all their guys, all their starters, because the starters aren't good enough yet, so they need to get them all the reps they can. The teams that go 0-4 are the ones who don't care about the starters playing because they know they've got great guys. So it's just like these kinds of things make you laugh a little bit.
Yeah,
but thank you for having me on today, man.
Yeah, absolutely,
exactly.
Ron. Absolutely, Ron. It's always a pleasure having you be my guest. I just saw the Beauty and the Beast movie, so I had to throw it stuck in my head.
You're not gonna sing at me, are you?
No, I try. No, in most part, I hate musicals, but it was a fantastic movie, and I know my little one, when she gets to go see it, it's like 2.5 hours long. So I didn't put her through that. So hey, none of the little ones bothered us today. So hey, I'm gonna call that a win, a positive. We're headed in the right direction. So thanks
again. I better
again.
go rescue the wife. So thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to the next one.
Yep. Same here, Ron. And until next time, folks, if you have any questions for us, 203-900, the number 4 SCU, that is the hotline. You can leave a message on our voicemail if you're inclined to do so. We may play it here on the air depending on the topic of discussion, or you could always send us a text and we'll read it here as well. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.